have Becky and Haley. I didn't want to butcher your last name, so I apologize, from Oregon State University. And they're going to present Mom You to Bomb. BOM is Boss of Mom's Boundaries. And they presented this in California in December at our national conference. So I'm excited to bring this to you guys, and I'm going to hand it over in just a minute. For those of you who have joined our previous virtual sessions, there will be CTLE credit. You'll get a SurveyMonkey after the session. And then after our last session at the end of this month, certificates will be sent out. And for those of you who are on the call at the very end, we will be giving away Amazon gift cards. So with that, I will hand it right over. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Katie. And thank you so much to everybody for being here today. We're really excited to bring you Mom You to Bomb. Even if you are not a mom, if you identify as a parent in other ways, or even if you are, just if you're an ag teacher who does not have kiddos at home, we hope this boundary conversation is really helpful for everybody. For our experience, we are moms, and so that's kind of where we're coming from as far as thinking about this and as far as kind of how we think about managing our boundaries. So I guess first, what does it actually look like to be the BOM? When I searched some pictures, I found all these wonderful, happy moms that are smiling and they're hugging their kids, and it makes me kind of sad. Like, I almost cried putting this together, because that is not how being the BOM looks at my house. Being the BOM at my house looks more like a bomb just went off. And especially now with kids home all the time, things are a little more explosive at our house. And so, as many of you probably are kind of adapting to having kiddos at home, to managing remote instruction, hopefully kind of the timing of this, while we hadn't really intended to be in virtual delivery mode across the board when we did this workshop, it is something that we're having to be even more conscientious about our boundaries. And so I guess as we think about that, this all kind of started actually with Haley doing a lot of this work in her research and bringing some of these things to our Oregon ag teachers, delivering this at conferences. And so for my part, hey everybody, I'm Becky Haddad. I've been at Oregon State for 3 years now, and listening to Haley as she was interacting with teachers and debriefing from workshops she was doing, one of the things that kind of struck me was just how important and how moms maybe needed this conversation in a little bit different ways than the broader teaching population. Because when we think about boundaries for moms, at least I know my boundaries are pushed pretty much from the minute my kids wake up in the morning, which is sometimes even before I wake up in the morning. And so kind of thinking about, what does it look like to manage our boundaries with our kiddos, both at school and at home? And so that's kind of where I was really fortunate to get to kind of partner with Haley, but I'll let her introduce herself and talk a little bit more about where this boundary work started for her.
Thanks, Becky. I'm Haley. I'm currently at Oregon State, and so this all kind of began when I was doing some research, working up to my dissertation a couple of years ago. And I'm a former high school ag teacher, and I was really interested to dig in this idea of work-life balance, as you all are familiar with. And I don't know, I really struggled with that concept as an ag teacher, as many of you may also struggle with. And I wanted to kind of dive into that with my research. And as I was talking to ag teachers in Oregon and across the country, the idea of boundaries really emerged as like a key piece to even striving for this kind of elusive idea of work-life balance. And it seems like boundaries is, this capstone piece of, striving for that. And boundaries are really hard to set sometimes, especially as ag teachers, because we have so many demands, so many roles and responsibilities, and a lot of different people and parties with expectations of us. And so after this kind of emerged, I thought, I'm going to do some digging and really read up on this idea of boundaries and like, how do we even create them? How do you how do you say no without feeling guilty? Or how do you say no without making your administrator angry? Or, you know, how do you say no but still do a good job in your profession? And so I engaged in some of this reading and started going through and developing these workshops. And I found personally that the stronger the conceptualization I was able to make of boundaries and how to actually enact them, the better I felt, like mentally, physically, emotionally. And I think I felt better about how I went about doing my job here at Oregon State as well. And so, you know, Becky has a similar story, I think. Kind of once we learn about this idea, we're like, wow, okay, you feel empowered, you feel agency to actually set boundaries and not feel as guilty. There's still a little guilt that I'm working with. But just feeling empowered to be able to set boundaries, because we want to give you, we want to empower you to set boundaries in your life, because we think they're really, really helpful to maintaining emotional well-being. So let's dive right in. Oh, and I'm a new mom, brand new. My little girl is only 2 months old. So this is a whole new game for me too. And man, I've realized how incredible parents are. It's nuts. Okay, so a couple goals for where we're going today. We really want to keep this discussion based. I think we have a small enough group that we can collaborate a little bit. We'll do that on a Google Doc here in a moment, and then we will engage in some breakout rooms to do some more intimate sharing. But we really want to create a space where we can share strategies and listen to each other and hear each other's stories, because we think that's also really an important piece of Ag Ed. So first, we're going to define boundaries and kind of explore what the heck they are and how they show up in my life or don't show up, and then find ways to empower our boundaries. Okay, so we're going to get right to it with two questions for you. Before we kind of go into defining boundaries, we are curious to know how you currently define boundaries. Like if you see or hear that word, what is something that comes to mind? And then how are you currently struggling with boundaries? We had this workshop and it was very different from what it is now because of obviously the pandemic. So we're really curious to see how you're doing with boundaries given your current situation. So Becky just attached or pasted the Google Doc link in the chat function if you want to click that. And we'll give maybe 6 or 7 minutes to jump on that Google Doc and start throwing ideas in the respective question boxes.
While everyone is on the Google Doc, I see so many people typing. I noticed that someone called in from their phone and I can't see who you are. So I want to make sure that you're counted for credit. So if you could just unmute yourself and announce yourself, that would be great.
It's probably me, Katie Paul Redmond.
I can see you. You've got your camera on.
Does that make sense?
You're good. I can
phone.
see. Yeah,
Okay.
I can see your face, which is good.
All right.
But it looks like someone might have just called in.
All right.
Maybe that's me. My name is Linda Iannone. Now that I figured out to shut off the mute. Hi.
Hi, Linda. I could see you already.
Well,
Thank you for
good,
being
good.
here.
Thank you.
Here, I can tell you guys who I have. I have Chandra, Morgan, Sherry, Kaylee, Tina, Terry, Paul, Michaela, Linda, Pat, Mary, Cassie, Gleason, Rain, Katie Carpenter, Robin Waite, and our mystery guest. Sherry Boardman, welcome to the party.
A couple of you have already started doing this, but as things kind of resonate, if you don't want to retype things that are on the doc, if you want to put a star or a check behind ones that you're kind of resonating with, definitely feel free to do that as an ad as well.
As you finish adding your thoughts, take a minute to scroll through the responses, and then maybe a few of you can unmute and share, what are some things you're noticing as you read the responses from your peers about defining boundaries and struggles? What are some patterns or overarching ideas that you're thinking, wow, that's interesting?
I've never heard ag teachers be so quiet. I think you missed the question. Would somebody like to share?
Thanks, Sherry.
I'll say something. So I think right now, especially with all of this remote learning and Zoom sessions and Microsoft Team meetings 5 times a day, it's hard for me to turn off when I'm in work mode, when I'm in home mode. And even though I don't have kids, I have 100 or 600 students that, you know, to some extent are kind of like my kids, and I want to help them out as much as I can because I don't see them face to face. So I'm seeing myself answer their emails at midnight because they submitted something late and they're apologizing for it, and I'm saying it's okay. And also, you know, just trying to be here for my husband and my family while they're also trying to figure everything out with their own jobs and lives.
Thank you.
Yeah, so boundaries is the amount of time and also when you're giving that time for those people.
Thanks, Paul.
I'm curious because I know that my definition of boundary changed and shifted slightly in the wake of COVID-19. And so I'm curious if my other ag teaching friends across the state feel like some of that has shifted for them. And if so, are these boundaries improvements, or are you finding sticking to your boundary more challenging during this time?
For me, definitely more challenging. I did 40-hour work week before this, and it was fantastic for teachers. I recommend it to anyone. And I was doing a really good job not bringing much work home, but now it's this all day long when you're expected to work 8-hour plus days with a toddler on your lap, or trying to get them to be a engaged person themselves, trying to do enrichment for them, and then everything you're supposed to do at home.
As everybody in New York knows, I had a real rough time at our first Zoom meeting, tears and all. And I finally decided that the easiest way to make the changes that I needed to do before I went crazy as the mother of a senior was to get away from him. So I made my husband set the camper up in the driveway, and I got myself a Wi-Fi extender and I plugged it in. And so I have my own space. It forced me to get up out of the recliner, get dressed every day, come out to my school, and proceed with what I had to do. I'm a lot happier this week having done that. And I think that having my own maybe set of boundaries by having my own school that I could come to has helped me mentally, because we are physically locked out of my school. We're not allowed to go anywhere near it. I had to basically beg and plead just to get permission to go by myself or to take my son with me to go to the sugar house to wrap up the evaporator, get that ready for, for summer. So, it's been a real rough transition. I know this is going to sound really strange, girls, but I envy you having a toddler on your lap, because I sometimes think that might be the key to a lot of mental health. As hard as a toddler is, dealing with a senior is a whole different set of challenges. And I have done a lot of FaceTiming with my grandchildren just to get myself off of the downhill slope. So you know, this is definitely not an easy task. 27 years of teaching, I would kind of hoped I never would have had to go through this, but here we are.
Thanks, Tina. Maybe one more thought before we keep moving. We'll continue to evolve this same conversation.
I think one piece that, you know, again, I think it's shown in the Google Doc is that we would have answered this question differently 3 weeks ago. And I appreciate our presenters from Oregon with your flexibility, but as you know, things have changed quite a bit. And listening to what Tina has said with a senior, or Morgan with an infant, or Kaylee with a husband who's now kicked her out of her own home office, or Terry that has grandchildren, I wonder too how it's different for someone who now is teaching their own students, but also teaching their own children. So that boundary makes it tough too, in that you need to make time to be the teacher of teachers of children in your house and teaching those who are needing help with printing or connecting with their own teachers. And I think that's something too that makes the boundary a little bit grayer right now. I know for me it is. I'm not used to having to do a schedule every day for 9th grade and for a college student home.
Sherry, this is Michaela. That for me has been the toughest part, is not only am I working with my students, but I have a 4.5-year-old at home who's just learning how to starting to, use the pencil. I've got the 2nd grader that has his responsibilities, and then the 4th grader who also does. So it's a lot, and there's no break. And you think you get everybody all set and ready to go, and you're gonna sit down and do some work and bang out some projects. And mom, can you get this? This isn't working. This isn't uploading. Mom, I need that. Can I have a snack? I'm like, there is no disconnect. And that for me has been a real struggle. I'm barely floating. I felt like week 1 was really hard. Week 2, I felt like better. This week, I feel like I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to make it, and it's only Wednesday. So I'm thankful for this today because I needed this. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks, Michaela. It's refreshing to hear your thoughts, because I'm feeling, a lot of the same things. We want to create boundaries. It seems like that's something that we want to do, but it's even more difficult now than ever when our physical boundaries are completely gone. And so finding ways to create boundaries so that we feel like emotionally well, I think is really important. And so I'm excited to kind of continue to share strategies throughout this presentation. The definition that we have is really similar to what y'all put on the Google Doc. It's just a limit defining you in a relationship to someone or something. So there's, several different types of boundaries. And it's really interesting to think about the way that we wanted to create boundaries before this whole thing happened and now, and how those have shifted or remained the same. Personally for me, it's more difficult work to create boundaries now, just because, we're not leaving our homes every day. So, as we think about strategies for creating boundaries, for us, we're really thinking about it as being okay with saying no to things, being okay to not be the person who's always available day or night, being okay with acknowledging our limits, saying like, nope, I can't do this right now, or, this is not something I can take on, or this is too much of an expectation given the circumstances. Being able to reflect it and say, okay, I acknowledge that's a limit, but then, having the courage to communicate that limit, talking with your administrator or your department, talking with your spouse, your children, and really knowing that you need to set limits, but then how to actually set those limits and create those boundaries. And we know from research that creating boundaries it seems like it's mean in a way, or it's uncomfortable, but we know from the research that it's healthy, and it creates emotional and physical well-being. And so finding ways to do that in a way that's tactful, that you feel good about, I think is really important.
So, this conversation's all well and good, but it's really hard to communicate boundaries when we don't know what boundaries have been crossed in the first place or where we're really feeling some of those things. And so one of the things we want to kind of take some time with this afternoon is thinking about, how do we feel when our boundaries have been crossed, so we can identify what those things are, really to kind of empower some reclaiming boundaries. Haley talked about, it can feel kind of mean when you start enforcing your boundaries and when you start kind of reclaiming your boundaries. But a lot of the boundary research talks about how having boundaries is really a very loving thing to do, which sounds crazy, especially if you're not used to kind of having it. But when people know where you're at and people can trust you to say no, they can be a lot more open with you in return. And so when we kind of think about what it feels like to have our boundaries crossed, some symptoms that kind of come out of the research are feeling overworked or smothered. And we saw some of that in kind of defining our boundaries a couple minutes ago. You can feel disrespected or underappreciated, annoyed or resentful, and guilty or shameful. And when we talk about shame, we're talking about really kind of a painful emotion that's caused by a consciousness of guilt, shortcoming, or just kind of generally feeling like this just isn't right. And so you'll see some space, some stuff got bumped down on the sheet, but I think it's down on page 3 now. We'd like to kind of have you dig in on some of these signs of ignored or crossed boundaries. And so you can enter your responses in the table to kind of identify under what circumstances do you feel overworked or smothered, disrespected or underappreciated, annoyed or resentful, and guilty or shameful. So we'll take a few minutes, go ahead and plug some ideas in there, and kind of same thing as before. If you're seeing something that resonates with you, those check marks or stars are great after those, but feel free to continue adding to the list for a couple minutes here. Also, real quick, if you've recently joined the call, I did refresh the link for the Google Docs in the chat. So if you weren't on with us for the last chat on the Google Doc, go ahead and click that link and you can join us on page 3 with signs of ignored or crossed boundaries. take just another minute or two on the doc. I see people have started kind of going back through and making check marks and stars after ones that are especially resonating. So we'll give you a minute or two to kind of look back through, and then we'll take some time to share out. All right, it looks like the typing has slowed a little bit. Thanks for sharing on those and thanks for engaging in that process. Like we said, we found it really important to be able to identify what it means to have our boundaries crossed, to be able to kind of reclaim and reinforce our boundaries moving forward. So let's take a couple minutes if anybody's willing to share out. Maybe we'll start with overworked or smothered. What are some of the ways, maybe especially now working from home, that you're feeling overworked or smothered?
I feel like the documentation administration has been like really emphasizing documentation. So it's a lot to do on top of your normal work. So the documentation just seems like I'm just drowning in it.
Thanks, Morgan.
Something I'm feeling more so now than ever, and I see that someone else had written it too, is there's no separation between like coming to work and being a worker. And for me, I'm still a student as well. So then I don't leave my desk and come back to my desk to do my master's degree work at the end of the day. So that I'm at my computer from 8 o'clock in the morning to sometimes 8 o'clock at night, and there's never really any breakaway other than walking the dog.
Thanks, Katie. Overworked or smothered was probably the one that I was feeling the most, especially 2 weeks ago. I got to about Wednesday of our first week of work remote and was just feeling completely invaded. And I was seeing all these things about people feeling isolated, and I just felt like everything was on top of me. Everything was in everything else's space. So that overworked or smothered was really real. Thanks for the thumbs up, Michaela. But that one's been a tough one for me to navigate at home.
It made me think, Becky, that, we're on Zoom now, but moving to remote work and going and doing everything through Zoom has been really interesting. At first, I was really excited about connecting with people on Zoom because, I did feel isolated, but now I feel over Zoomed, like zoomed out. I don't know. Like it's one, because everything, you can't just pop down the hall and have ask a quick question. It's like you have to schedule a Zoom meeting, and then that turns into 30 minutes. And then before you know it, you have 4 hours of back-to-back Zoom meetings. And you're just like, I still have to pee. I really want to get a snack, or I just want to sit there and be quiet for a minute. And, I don't want to have to worry about my hair. And so it's been kind of an interesting realization, this whole remote Zoom situation.
Yeah, we've been calling it Zoom fatigue, and how can we avoid fatiguing our teachers by inviting them to so many Zoom meetings. So yeah, I feel that too.
I think as I read through this theme of being overwhelmed with urgent things to do, I'll just be honest, what popped into my mind was many, many years ago, I went through the Stephen Covey 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. And one of those habits, I can't recall each one, but what comes to my mind is putting first things first, and really, really important to identify those things that are most important to you, not the things that are most urgent. Identify those things that are most important and really focus on those things you're doing. So just a thought that popped into my mind as I was reading through all those topics.
Thanks for sharing, Terry. All right, so we'll move on as far as other thoughts go. You can definitely feel free to continue to add to the Google Doc as we have our conversation here and as we kind of share out. Let's move to disrespected or unappreciated. What are some things that you're kind of feeling within this idea of boundaries being crossed?
I know that in my own personal experience, we have a fairly new principal. She's only been on the job 2 years. I think she's struggling really hard. Our superintendent's been on the job since February 1st, and he's an interim. They're both doing their best, but we've yet to have a faculty meeting. Every time an email comes from her, it's a different plan, and there's no consistency at all whatsoever. So I feel, as a more seasoned teacher, I feel the pressure to try and do something like this with our teachers. The elementary principal is doing a great job with her staff. They're feeling very connected. They're feeling very supported. But I just was having a conversation with the head of our student council to try and do something like we're doing on the Ag Ed Connection for New York, and doing, Wacky Hair Wednesday, or in this case, Workout Wednesday, just doing something to try and judge the morale of the others in your school district, because we've had no connection, no reaction, nothing. So it's a little bit, I took it, I guess I took offense to the fact that the board president, on our very last day of school, we were not allowed to have kids in the building, only for a very short window. They had to sign in the front, come and get all their stuff, make sure they had their Chromebooks, and then leave. And about an hour before the end of the day, when we were to leave the building and not come back in, the union president's like, "Oh, I just wanted to let you know that if they don't vote on your tenure before June 30th, you'll be tenured." Like, seriously, is that all you have to worry about right now? I feel like that in our case, the ones that everybody needs to look to for direction have either no clue what they're doing, or they've lost their mind. And it could be both. I don't really know, but I feel like I have to reach out to teachers that I'm working with on a regular basis, because I don't know if others are feeling that way. And I'll say it, and you all know where I'm coming from. But if we didn't have Sherry, and we didn't have Katie, and we didn't have Kaylee, and we didn't have Derek, and we didn't have their leadership and what they're giving us on a regular basis, I think we would be even more lost than many of us are. But we are so fortunate to have our state staff on our team. And, I only hope that there are other state staff that are doing the same thing, because the individual school districts aren't.
Thanks for sharing, Tina, and way to go, New York State staff.
I would just add my comments that when I explained to the principal and superintendent that we'd already had a 2-hour Zoom, they were impressed. So they're following our lead, not vice versa.
Thanks, Paul. I'm seeing a couple others that just got added for disrespected and underappreciated. So we're seeing some additional thoughts kind of coming in here. What else do we want to share on the disrespected or unappreciated theme? Feel like I needed to call out an anonymous ibex for an anonymous coyote for typing on the Google Doc and not sharing out to everybody else. But I know.
Sorry.
A little tricky. No, that's great. Do you have anything you want to share?
I was just gonna say, kind of along the lines of what Tino's saying, I agree, and I feel like ag teachers in general are so much more ahead of admin, because we had our cabinet meeting yesterday with our principal, and she decided that it's time that we start doing live chats with our students to kind of have a more of a connection there, because the students miss us. And I just kind of laughed. I said, you know what, why don't you go check our Google Classrooms, because the ag teachers have been doing this since day one, because that's what the kids want and that's what we've been doing. And apparently the other teachers haven't, and I think it's odd.
Thanks for sharing. One that had recently posted that kind of resonated with me was this idea that you need to work to feel a certain way about how things are kind of happening right now. You know, there's, I think, a lot of well-meaning encouragement, or a lot of, you know, kind of pull yourself up, you'll be all right. And if you're not feeling that way, kind of feeling like, hey, wait a second, isn't this a fair way to feel when things have been so turned upside down? And so I think also recognizing where some of that messaging is maybe feeling like, hey, wait a second, this is an okay way to be processing this right now, and kind of validating where you're at with some of those things too, I think is a really important thing. So thanks for whoever added that one. Let's move
if I could just interrupt, I know that all of us are going through so many adversities right now that whether we were home because of the pandemic or not, a lot of these same sentiments would be apropos, but they're even more compounded because of the added stress and the overwhelming feelings that people have. So I just want to give a shout out to, you know, our friend from New York City, our teacher. We are all with you, and we know that all of us have some struggling times, but I know that you probably have even some more stressors right now, worrying about your students and their health and your own, amidst of your own little war down there in New York City. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sherry. Okay, so let's take a look at annoyed and resentful. We've got actually quite the list in these next two. What are some things that we want to share out on annoyed or resentful?
One thing I'm a little bit annoyed about is the administration not understanding things like college and the high school credit. During a faculty meeting the other day, I teach 2 classes right now for college and the high school credit, and it came up during the faculty meeting. I said, what's the expectation? Because I'm being told that I can't give new content and move along as an elective teacher, but I have a responsibility to the college. And my administrator said, oh, well, they already went home, they're done. Wrong. So it's a little bit like Tina had said, aggravating in the fact that sometimes I feel like I know more than they do, and they're the ones that are supposed to be guiding the rest of us. So I'm resentful of that, because I feel like I'm the one that has to educate them about what the expectations are, even though they realistically are the ones that should know this.
Thanks for sharing, Michaela.
One that I notice on here, seeing an overload on Instagram and Facebook of other teachers and programs that makes you feel like you're not doing enough or that you won't be able to do it like them. One thing that I constantly need to remind myself is the fact that comparison kills joy. And I really struggle with it. But seeing that, like, that resonates with me, is like, you know, are we doing a good enough job? And I think at the end of the day, all that really matters is that you're doing the best job that you can do with the resources that you have. So it's okay to feel that way, but it's okay. What you're doing is good too.
To follow up with that, I think that's really interesting because that particular bullet point has come up quite a bit in my research, and how ag teachers are constantly comparing each other, themselves to each other, and specifically how social media plays into that. I'm curious for anyone on the call if, you know, if that feeling of comparison or competition, does that contribute to you eroding your boundaries? Do you find yourself eroding your boundaries so that you can feel like you're doing enough, or that you feel like you need to do more?
Haley, I'm going to ask you a question on your question. Do you find that there's a difference in that answer coming from a veteran teacher versus the new kid? So I've been working with a lot of new teachers in District 4. Pretty much there's myself and one other teacher that have been in the profession for quite a while. Everyone else around us, they're new, under 5 years. So it's been interesting to see the shift in the dynamics in our district and the shift in my attitude. You know, I used to want to keep up with the Jameses, but now I'm like, you know, hey, if you can get that grant and you can make these things happen, you know, I'm looking at it from a real different point of view now, later in life. So do you see that happening other places, or am I just getting too old to deal with any of that stuff?
Thanks, Tina. I really appreciate your perspective. So far my research has been mostly with early career ag teachers, kind of years 1 through 5. And I would say overwhelmingly from the participants in my studies, they feel comparison and pressure from their peers who are kind of similar in age, but also from more established veteran ag teachers. So they want to be good in the eyes of their peers or better than those folks based on, you know, mostly it's like competitions and like program growth and things like that. But they also want to they want to feel belong. They want to feel like they belong in the profession. So they want to be recognized and validated by more veteran teachers like yourself. So if you are a veteran teacher, keep encouraging those younger teachers. I will say though that for my dissertation research, I did talk to more veteran teachers. I think they were had over 9 years of experience, and they too kind of fed into the competitive nature. There was actually like a finding that was called arms race, and how ag teachers are constantly kind of just one-upping each other and not really talking about it. And it's kind of this silent battle between ag teachers to be really good. And that was kind of seen as like a destructive thing that happens in the culture of ag ed. But that was only, you know, that was a small sample of teachers. So I can't, you know, generalize that to the whole country. But I think like thinking about boundaries, like if we are comparing ourselves to each other, and you know, that's hard to eliminate. And same with competition, especially in our profession where competition is a big piece of what our students do. At least for me personally, wanting to be good and wanting to belong and wanting to be recognized, that contributed to my boundary breakdown, if you will. You know, I would choose to do emails later at night, or, you know, apply for a grant on the weekend, or stay longer hours and have practices. That eroded my boundaries, but it was because I wanted to be good. And so I made that sacrifice. Ultimately, it was not healthy for me. I had a lot of physical and mental, negative ramifications from that. And so that's kind of some personal background on why I choose to engage in this kind of work.
I think, depending on where you are in your teaching career, it might be a little bit different. 27 years into this, I look at, I'll say Tara, and she's not on this call, but there's nothing that I would like better than to beat Tara in ag issues, and she certainly knows that. So, I understand the competition piece, but one of the really neat things here in New York that I think elevates us, because I've been sending ideas all over the country to teachers that I've worked with in the past, we've all pooled our resources. So that has taken so much off of our individual plates. And I'm going to use what I'm doing with my Technology 7 kids, because how do you give good, authentic, hands-on learning to Technology 7 kids that you've not done AF&R case training? So you're still doing the old industrial arts way of teaching Tech 7. And I just was absolutely, utterly speechless, not knowing what to do. And Carol Wright came up with this list. There was another teacher that took that list and morphed it into a points situation, and it's just ballooned from there. We have shared curriculum and shared ideas and found things that have been working and not working. And it's been really, really, I think, important for all of us across the state as a teacher to have that support system. Nothing is ours. If you need it, it's yours. We're going to help you. And constantly on emails, we're finding that even ag companies and ag businesses are chiming in with free services that we can use for our kids. And, I'm going to take it a little further, and I felt really sorry for myself a week ago. Now that we're one more week in, and I don't know when the end is in sight for us, I feel bad for other curriculums. The core teachers, I don't know how they're going to do it, because they're so set in their ways, and a lot of them don't necessarily go with the flow, and they certainly don't have the resources that Ag Ed does. So, it's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be a struggle, but we are so fortunate that we have the ability to reach out and work with others, not only just in our state, but across the country.
Thanks, Tina. We're gonna move on from annoyed or resentful, because we are actually coming up on time, and we do want to make sure that we don't stay in, it's really helpful to identify where our boundaries have been crossed and kind of where we're at with some of these things, but we want to make sure that we leave today also having some opportunity to think about how do we move forward, and how do we really kind of engage in a process of reclaiming our boundaries and reinforcing our boundaries. So I think actually we're gonna maybe switch gears a little bit. We can kind of see some of those additional ones with guilty and shameful, and then kind of hit on some of those ideas. But we want to take some time to really generate some strategies for how do we move forward, and how do we continue to grow in reclaiming and reinforcing our boundaries. Sorry, I'm getting my notes together here. So I think just as we kind of think about some of those boundary building strategies, Haley and I, in prepping for this, recognizing that this was going to be a little bit different conversation than our initial workshop at NAAE, a couple of the things we kind of talked about, were how cathartic it is to be able to kind of chat through with people what this looks like. Because Haley and I kind of sat down for a meeting last week to get this ready, and Haley said, well, man, how do we talk about this? And so we kind of just started processing with each other, okay, what are the things that we've done, especially since we started work remote, but what are the things we've been doing already that kind of help us establish those boundaries and build those strategies? So we're going to actually set up some breakout rooms real quick. So you'll have some opportunity to kind of chat amongst yourselves. We're going to give you, I think, 7 minutes here in breakout rooms to kind of chat about ways that you're reclaiming and enforcing boundaries. We'll bring it back together in about 7 minutes to share those out and kind of generate a list of strategies that you can take forward in your own practice of reinforcing and reclaiming boundaries as we move beyond this session. So give me 2 seconds. We'll get the breakout rooms rolling and we'll give you some time to chat.
I think number one on our list is invest in a camper.
All right, so you've got your invites to join those breakout rooms. Go ahead and head to those breakout rooms and we'll reconnect in 7 minutes.
All right, looks like we are coming back. I'm gonna go ahead and we have about 15 minutes left. I'd love to hear from each group. Now I can't see who is in each group, so I know I was in group number 1. So maybe someone from my group can start us off. What are some strategies that you have done or want to do to kind of empower or reinforce or reclaim your boundaries?
So we talked a little bit about putting things in our calendar, you know, saying this time, this is lunchtime, this is off work time, and kind of like setting up that schedule for ourselves. I had mentioned, you know, leaving my apartment and driving for a few minutes and then coming back as like a way to trick my mind that I'm going to the office. But really just trying to keep that schedule and be strict about it for our own well-being.
Thanks, Katie. So yeah, the idea of trying to maintain some semblance of a schedule is important, probably for all of our sanity. Another group. Actually, Becky, can you pull up the groups and see who is in group 2? You can just call on people. Sorry, you're also typing stuff.
While they're waiting, I'll say that I really appreciated Haley's comment about her designating this spare room or guest room as an office, so that when that door closed, she's really not at home, and her husband takes care of kids, and she's been able to draw that physical boundary. I thought that was very wise.
Thanks. It's been hard. We're learning. It's not a perfect system yet, but just having the physical separation, I think, is important, and that came up earlier in the conversation too.
Rain, you want to share for group 2?
Oh, sorry. There we go. So we kind of talked about the social media a little bit, and I also kind of spoke about when I was pregnant earlier in the year. It kind of gave me the opportunity to practice saying no a little bit at school, just because, like, physically, you know, being 9 months pregnant is kind of hard to do a lot of stuff as an ag teacher. So I had some practice with saying no, and it was, you know, it was really hard at first, but it was a relief to realize that it's okay to say no, and everything will go on and people won't be mad at you. And then the second thing we talked about was the social media posts and, you know, getting overloaded by them all the time, and that we really need to realize that all these other programs are not like ours. And like for me myself, I'm a one-man band. I don't have, you know, a co-advisor or anything like that. So these other programs, we have to realize they might have help from another teacher. They might have help from their students doing these posts, or they might, you know, we have to realize what's in the background behind it and not try to think about and try to compare about how you could do that in your own program, just because everybody's so different. We have to understand that that's for them. And also a lot of these social media posts aren't to rub it in each other's faces or try to one up each other. And the purpose of these posts are to share for their communities and making sure that they're getting the support at home that they have. It's not, you know, bragging to the ag ed community. It's more sharing so that, you know, the community knows what we're doing in our ag programs and that we have the support. So.
Thanks, Rain.
Mm-hmm.
Katie, you want to share for group 3?
Sure. So we had a really nice conversation, and Sherry and I are kind of in the same boat where we are going to be new moms soon. So we feel like we're kind of putting putting all in to get ready before maternity leave. And then how do you pull back from that when that baby does arrive? So it's kind of a stark transition from one place to another. And so Michaela and Paul gave really great feedback. We also talked a little bit about Sherry's situation with her stipend, and Michaela offering really good advice, saying, you know, this is a time for you to ease into feeling like you're going into maternity leave, because don't do things for free, because they're going to expect that from you. So if they're cutting you off financially at this point, you really need to think about what your boundaries are, and what they'll be once you're out on maternity leave too.
Thanks, Katie. I really appreciate that comment about doing things for free. In the original boundaries presentation, I had a list of all the things that the school had asked my husband to do for free in 1 year. He's a shop teacher, so you can, and many of you can relate. And there was like 35 different things that people had asked him to do at school, mostly fixing things or building things for free. And it makes you really think about, you know, how much are you willing to do for free, and, you know, what is in your contract and your extended contract, and really looking at your roles and your responsibilities and creating boundaries from that. So I appreciate that.
Morgan, you want to share for group 4?
We were mostly catching up, but one thing we talked about is that we are, Chandra and I are planners, and that right now it's like a very fluid environment in planning. You really do try so hard to make a plan and follow a schedule for the day, but things are always changing right now. So it's sometimes not as handy as it typically is.
And do we have one more group, or is that it?
Yeah, we have one more. Cassie, you want to share out for group 5?
Sure. So Linda and I, we got to know each other, and we're both kind of in the same boat where we're not teaching ag right now. I'm teaching kindergarten and pre-K at a Christian school, and she's substitute teaching, but we both want to be teaching agriculture, and we're looking to get hired for this next coming fall year. And with this virus and everything going on, everything's just kind of up in the air. And so, you know, with my situation with the teaching kindergartners, I'm relying on the parents to get their information and making sure that they're successful for first grade. And the struggles with that. But as for just teaching agriculture, where, you know, we talked about how it is discouraging a little bit, and we feel like, not because of our age, because she mentioned a little bit of age discrimination, of being older, and I said, well, I'm younger, I'm on the opposite end of that spectrum, but I don't think that's why. It's just not in the timing right now, and so we need to just be hopeful during this time and know that this will come to pass at some point. And so we just tried to encourage each other during this time and stay hopeful.
Thank you. You know, as you listen to everyone on the call, what are some other strategies that you think are worth sharing with the group? How do we create and reclaim those boundaries so that we can survive this?
Well, this is Linda. For me, I did a training last spring, and it's important to know your own self and to be really grounded in yourself and to know what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. And my training was in to be a yoga teacher. And so we did a lot of SEL work. And I know that that is so helpful for teaching and for any organization, but to be really aware of your limits, what is, you know, what you're good at, what you're not good at, what you need, what you don't need. And when I hear all this work about boundaries, it reminds me of all that and how important it is to be present and to meditate and to, you know, and to really know yourself and your strengths. And that's a big job. Mm-hmm. That's what I found out. So just, that's something I thought of when I hear all the struggles and, you know, balancing work that the hard work everybody's doing. I wanted to add that.
Thanks, Linda.
Sure.
What would you what advice could you give us for those of us who, you know, who want to set a limit, but are scared to, because they don't want to be told that they're not doing their job good enough, or they feel like there'll be some judgment from their peers or their administrators or the community? What advice could you give us?
Well, this training that I did was with 125 teachers from all of New York City. It was amazing. And it really hit home how important it is to stand for what you believe about yourself. And when you do that, how everything falls into place, how everything can be well. But when you're trying to please others or to justify yourself to administrators or whatever it is, you know, that you're going to be shy or fall short. And that's why that self-work is so important. And until you do that and are willing to step up and do that, even when you have little kids, there was a lot of young mothers and all kinds of teachers, but it was a very powerful experience. It was called Breathe for Change. And it was just for teachers and educators. And it was very, very good. So that's my advice. And it was much greater than I thought it was going to be.
Thanks, Linda.
Linda's comments made me think about, I had the opportunity to attend the Teacher Turn the Key training when I was a new teacher. And the year that I went, they talked about the importance of having a vision or mission statement for not only your program as an ag educator, but also for you and your family. And so that's something that I kind of put on the back burner when I was a teacher. But then when I had my two daughters, I have 2 under 2. So our house is very busy, and that has come to the forefront of reevaluating with my priorities and testing what I'm being asked to do against that vision or that mission. So, you know, for us, for our family, it's really to be a mom first for me personally. And so if I'm asked to do something above and beyond my job description, I test it against that mission. Is this going to be something I can do with my family, or is this going to be something that pulls me away from that vision that I have for my children, our family, and your program? So that might be something that we all can be working towards during this time where we're working virtually.
Excellent. Agreed. Yeah.
That's really cool, Kaylee. Thank you. Any final thoughts to share out before we kind of wrap things up here?
As I listen to this group, I think about something that happened last night. I had the opportunity to go out and do a little electrical wiring for my son in a barn that he's working on. So we had to turn off the lights. And in the process, we used the skid steer lights. And we worked for a while and it was working really well. And it came time that we had to move the skid steer to put some things in place. And guess what? The battery was dead. So my message to you all is that you've got to figure out a way for each of you to recharge yourself, because this is a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Thanks, Terry. So when we're done here, if you want to look back in that Google Doc, Becky has been typing in the comments you've shared from your group. And then you can also see some of the strategies that Becky and I generated this past week about how we're setting boundaries for ourselves and our work. Feel free to continue to add to that document and connect with us. Becky, you want to take us home?
I would love to. Thanks again, everybody, for sharing today. We'll share both the recording and the Google Doc back to Katie, so she has those to share again, so you've got those strategies to draw on. One thing I really appreciated, as Haley and I were talking last week, she mentioned somebody had commented to her, this isn't the time to necessarily start something new. You know, going back to the things you kind of rely on, kind of finding that quiet and giving yourself permission to do that was one of the strategies I really appreciated from Haley. And so one of the things that I found myself doing in that going, you know, right from thing to thing to thing and feeling like I just go all day and don't have time to just decompress. My kids are napping right now, but when they wake up, it's chaos and a half. And last week I finally I picked up a book, they played, and I sat there. I was there if they needed something. But I kind of gave myself permission to not be engaged in the play with my kids. They're 4 and almost 5 and almost 2. And they figured it out. It wasn't a huge, crazy break for them, and kind of gave me some additional space that I was definitely needing. So in addition to the resources that you've all generated as far as some strategies this afternoon, we'd also point you to some things that we use to kind of learn more about boundaries, to help us kind of reinforce our boundaries. How to Say No Without Feeling Guilty by Brightman and Hatch. The Boundaries books by Cloud and Townsend. They've got quite the selection for various stages of your life. And you know, they've got some additional resources in terms of blogs and videos and learning materials to kind of help with some of those boundaries refreshers that you might need. And then also the Disease to Please, because a lot of where we let our boundaries go tends to be in that area of kind of feeling like we're trying to make everybody else happy. So those are a couple resources. Another resource as far as kind of a community, we'd love to have you join after our workshop at NAAE this last winter. One of the cool things that came out of this was a few of the ag teachers there got this Facebook group going that we kind of help facilitate now, geared towards moms, but anybody is welcome. It's not a closed group that way, but if you search BOMS-NAAE, you're welcome to join us on Facebook to continue the conversation, to get some of those boundaries refreshers and to kind of find those accountability partners who are also kind of working at reclaiming and navigating their boundaries. So we'd love to have you join us there. That QR code is wrong, so don't hold your phones up for that. But we'll share a folder back to Katie so that you do have some additional resources on boundaries, and anything that we generated today you'll have access to. We're also happy to continue the conversation via email. We can obviously Zoom as well, but we really appreciate you being here today. Thanks for your transparency and openness and engaging in this conversation. We think it's a really important conversation to have, and we were really privileged to get to be with you all this afternoon. So thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Haley and Becky, for being here, here virtually. But I really appreciate you guys taking the time to share some of your knowledge with our teachers. And I think that there has been conversation to the point that I actually shared it with my family and told them, because they're all educators as well, that I'll share this presentation with them when the recording is posted. So for those that are still on the call, like I said in the beginning, you'll receive a survey from me either tonight or tomorrow for the CTLE credit for this. And we are going to give away 3 cards. So I've entered everybody's name into a random list organizer, and I'll do it 3 times. So the first person from each list will be the one to receive. You've received a gift card from a previous session. I'm going to, and you're the person in one of these 3, I'm going to skip to someone else just to try to spread the wealth. So our first one is Michaela Kerr. So congratulations, Michaela.
Yay.
And I will email, it's a emailed code. And then our second, we have Rain Ives. And lastly, we have, oh, lots of messages. Paul Redmond.
Yay, congratulations.
All right.
You will get an email from me.
I have one more
either
comment
today
to
or
add.
tomorrow.
Do you have a second?
Yeah.
I think no one has actually said how important it is for your own children to see you set the examples by setting good boundaries. When you do that, you set a good example for your kids.
Yeah, definitely, Paul. I think I've really idolized some of our colleagues that have been setting phenomenal boundaries. Like I will give 10,000 hand claps because she set a boundary and then just mentioned it. And I was like, oh, cool. I didn't even realize. So thank you, Paul. So yeah, Rain, Michaela, Paul, you guys can expect an email from me. You'll get 2, one with your credit and one with your card. And thank you for being here. Hopefully it's sunny where you are and you get to enjoy the rest of your day. Photosynthesizing, as I told my family I was going to do during my lunch. So thank you.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Be safe, be well.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Gleason, if you can hear me,